In today's video, we're going to army paint all 20 of the Hobgrot Slitters with Sophie! Yay!
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible through each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the Studio Collectors. Dominion is finally here and we are proud to share with you the entire series of videos where we'll paint up the miniatures quickly and beautifully. In this video, I've designed a step-by-step process so that Sophie can paint up all 20 of the Hobgrot Slitters.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I've been working here for like about 2 months, and that just means that my painting experience is 2 months. So hopefully this tutorial will be helpful for other beginners like me out there.
Because these steps are designed for army painting, the steps are going to be very easy and replicable, so don't worry about it. In this video, I'll be painting the first miniature and then Sophie will paint the rest of the miniatures as she shares her insights with all you guys. So if you're just starting the hobby,
Or if you have a friend that wants to try it out,
this video is just right for you. So as usual, we've divided this video into easy to watch chapters, and these chapters are contrast, base coating, shading, and lastly, the details. In this video, we will be primarily using AK Gen 3 paints. However, if you are using GW paints, I will be providing close alternative colors so that you can closely follow with this tutorial. So anyway, we are moving on to the concept stage where I will be describing and outlining the steps for Sophie. If you're here just for the painting segment, why don't you just skip on ahead to the contrast segment. So ready, Sophie?
as ready as I will be.
Let's go! So welcome to the concept chapter of this video. So Sophie, the models have already been assembled and zenithal highlighted. Do you know what zenithal highlighting is?
No.
Okay, so zenithal highlighting fundamentally is having the models prime black and having a nice spray of white from the top so that the exposed surfaces catch on with the white paint and you get the volumes already pre-highlighted for you. And because the shadows still remain black, this lends to allowing the contrast paint to have even deeper shadows for the miniature. Then next up, we'll be using the contrast paints. So contrast paints fundamentally is flooding the miniature with a thick glaze which allows the areas that are white to be covered in color and you get a very smooth transition. Coupled with the zenithal technique, the contrast method allows the models to look even more contrasty.
Easy enough, I should be able to do that.
So right after the contrast stage, we are going to be doing some base coating using the metallic paints. And thereafter, we're going to do some basic weathering where I'll show you some quick tips and tricks where you can make the metals look really old and worn out.
I might make some mistakes on those. Is that okay?
Don't worry about it, we'll just find the closest color and I'll suggest some close colors that you can clean up those areas where you have brushed over with the metallics. Then after that, we're going to go into the details where I'll show Sophie how to do some basic weathering to make these miniatures look like they've been really fighting a really long war. Remember, the most important thing about painting is you should be relaxed and having fun. Alright, ready?
Ready.
Alright, so let's go! Welcome to the first chapter of the painting segment. So the Hobgrot Slitters have already been assembled and zenithal primed. If you're not sure how we have done so, why don't you check back on the previous video where we have talked about the sub-assembly and how you can batch paint the zenithal highlights very quickly with a spray can. So for this stage, I recommend using a synthetic squirrel hairbrush. These brushes have very soft bristles and they are highly absorbent, very useful for wicking out the extra paint that you might be putting onto the miniatures. So I'll be guiding Sophie how to do the contrast stage. And for this stage, I will be using these colors right here. Alright, so get these colors ready, get your brushes ready. So are you ready, Sophie?
Ready.
Let's go! Alright, so I'm going to be mixing some contrast paints here. I'm going to use Nazareth Yellow mixed in with a bit of Agrax Dunes. The ratio is 2:1. And this will be used for the skin tones. Just do this liberally. And don't worry about getting it over the metal and the twine areas because we will always use a different color and we can always fix that. So you see, this is really quick, takes about a couple of seconds per skin tone. And you just want to make sure you wick off the excess using a drier brush later. Okay, so right here I'm using a thinned down version of Magos Purple. And this is thinned down to the ratio of 1 Magos Purple to 3 drops of contrast medium. Okay, I'm doing this in all the areas where blood vessels will show. So I apologize, previously I said that we were only going to use contrast, but this is us trying to clean up the contrast stage. So right here I'm going to be using a mix of AK Gen 3 interior green yellow, and alternatively you can use green camo to lay out the flesh. So right here I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 buff mixed in with AK Gen 3 wine red to highlight the areas that we have done with Magos purple previously. You can always use just Empress Children pink to highlight these areas, and this is the result.
So Kenneth usually teaches me base coat, layering and highlighting for these models that we do. So using contrast for the first time was really eye-opening because it just kind of does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, which I appreciate and I think most beginners would appreciate. So contrast painting isn't as hard as I thought it'd be.
Yep.
It's way easier to overload it than just painting it just as it is. Also, thinning with contrast, super useful.
Yeah, as usual, we thin down our contrast paints 3 parts medium to 1 part paint.
I tried using water but didn't work out that well.
Yeah, it creates very weird tight marks that why don't you just invest in contrast medium because it just does its job. So after we've finished the contrast stage, we're going into the base coating. In this next chapter, we are going to learn how to base coat using metallic paints. Metallic paints are more opaque and they have more coverage than the contrast paints. In this chapter, I'm going to be sharing with you how to properly load up your brush and paint the miniatures so that you can have a very smooth painting experience. So in essence, when you pick up the paints from the palette Sophie, you want to unload the excess paint onto a paper towel or your fingernail before you paint it onto the miniature. Otherwise, the brush will just unload all the excess paint and it can be a little bit messy.
I'll try to be as neat as I can.
Anyway, don't worry about it. If you make any mistakes at this stage, you can always use a similar color to cover the mistakes and you'll look just as good as new. So for this chapter, I'll be using these colors right here. Alternatively, if you don't have these colors, these are the GW alternatives that I would have been using. Alright, so if you are ready, let's get base coating the metallics right now. So I've mixed in AK Gen 3 gunmetal with AK Gen 3 bronze in a ratio of about 2:1. And alternatively, you can use Games Workshop lead voucher to replace this stage for this base coating. I'm going to do this on all the metal areas. Okay, right now I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 Dark Rust or Games Workshop Rhinox Hide to just paint in the twine. You just want to do this carefully so that you can reduce the cleanups.
So this is my experience with metal base coating. I think using metallic paints is pretty great because it just straight up looks like regular metal by the time you plaster everything on. Yeah, so in the end, I tried to be as careful as I could be, but I still ended up making mistakes. Luckily, like he said, it is true, it's easier to just cover it up with similar looking paints. But in the future, I'll try to just not mess it up. It'll go by a lot faster that way.
So with the metallic base coating out of the way, I'm going to show Sophie how to use the shading technique to make these surfaces look even more eye-catching.
They already look pretty good though.
So for the shading stage, we're going to be applying this using a similar technique like the contrast stage. This will allow the little sculpted details to show, and don't worry, there is a lot of margin for mistakes in this step. So for this stage, I'll be using these colors right here from Games Workshop. Alright, so let's get them ready, and Sophie, let's get shading right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm using Games Workshop Agrax Earthshade to just shade down all the metals and the twines. So let me explain what shading is. Shading is allowing this transparent dark paint to sit into the recesses, and because it sits into the recesses, it dries darker and allows you to see more details.
I did not expect from the process of shading that so many little details and nooks and crannies that I didn't notice before would show up. It's actually pretty cool. So actually shading is a really easy way to get a lot of details out. But I did notice that it works a lot better on places with crevices rather than flat surfaces, which is something you have to note.
So in our final chapter, we're going to zoom in on the miniatures and pick out the little details, as well as I'm going to show Sophie how to do some quick weathering techniques and make sure these miniatures look like they've gone through the thick of battle.
Can't wait to bring these miniatures alive.
So for this stage, I'm going to be using these colors right here. Alternatively, you can use these colors if you don't have them, or just mix anything similar. So are you ready? Let's get painting the little details on the Hobgrot Slittaz right now. Alright, so right here I'm going to be using a little bit of AK Gen 3 blue-green thin down into a wash, and this will form as verdigris. And look at this, it's almost just like shading. It dries really nicely and gives an added dimension. Right here I'm going to be using AK Gen 3 matte red to paint in the eyes. I'm just going to dot in the eye with a little bit of white. So now I've gone over the left hand side of the model using Gore Grunter Fur from Games Workshop, the contrast range, and I'm using medium orange to just light up the areas. I know for a beginner painting video this might be a bit confusing, but just bear with me right here. Okay, so now I'm gonna be moving up to AK Gen 3 light orange, or you can use Fire Dragon Bright for this stage. This is meant to showcase the evening sun that the models are fighting in. Okay, to showcase the reflected light coming from below the swamp, I'm currently using AK Gen 3 Dark Green Grey, or you can use Incubi Darkness from Games Workshop. Okay, this is to showcase the under volumes of the model.
So I originally didn't really get it when Kenneth told me to put in environmental lighting, because I saw all these pieces as just separate by themselves. But once I actually put all of it together, it told like one cohesive story with all 20 of the Hobgrot Slitters. Okay, these are looking pretty good. The bases are a bit plain though.
Yeah, don't worry about that. You can always just put some texture paste, put on some tufts, and these miniatures are ready for battle. Alternatively, you can catch our next video where I'll be going very in depth of how you can create the swamp bases for these miniatures. So there we have it. These are the 20 Hobgrot Slitters painted by Sophie. So this is the model I painted on its own. As you can see, it looks pretty impressive for a couple of minutes of work, but let's see how they look all together. And this is all of them together. So you can see this is such a cohesive unit, and the orange glow is tying all of them together. Find this really awesome. So these miniatures took Sophie slightly over 6 hours to complete, and I must say they look super impressive as a cohesive unit together. So thank you Sophie for joining in this video, and catch her in our future painting videos coming up very soon.
Now I'll disappear into the void where I always go to when I'm not in videos.
So let me know down in the comments below if you found this video format useful and if it helps you or your friends get into the hobby. Thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. So as usual, if you found this video useful, give us a like and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel even further, head on to our Patreon and become a patron, because this really keeps our lights on. I'd like to thank all our patrons for allowing me to do this, and I hope to see you guys in the next AOS Dominion painting video. See you!